So we're going to carry on with the Anapanasati Sutta, but first of all, I hope you are all enjoying yourself. Hope you're having a good time. I'm enjoying myself because it's always nice to talk about the Dhamma and being in good company, etc. So it's wonderful to be here, and please keep on enjoying yourself. If you feel that things are not going too well, then just relax a little bit, and if things are going really well, then wonderful, carry on with what you're doing here. So we're going to come back to the theory behind all of this, which of course are the suttas of the Buddha. And we have looked this morning at the idea of kaya nupassana through the lens of mindfulness of breathing here. And of course, what is nice about seeing the kaya nupassana in this way, it's kind of a pleasant way of doing kaya nupassana. Yeah, sometimes looking at the 31 parts of the body or the cemetery contemplations, it's a bit too much for some people. And it is not just a bit too much for some people, it's a bit too much for many people. There's a very famous story about the monks who did the contemplation of the 31 parts of the body, the Asubha Sanya, and they did it so much, I don't know if you heard this story, they did it so much that they started to commit suicide. And they asked to be killed. And this is the origin story behind one of the main rules for the monastics, the rule about not killing human beings. That is the story. The Buddha went on retreat, and after the Buddha came off retreat, the Buddha asked, where are all the monks? They're dead. That's when the meditation has gone too far. And so what that means is that if we use meditations that are inherently a bit unpleasant, inherently they go against the defilements, and whenever we go against the defilements, it can be painful in a certain way. It means we have to be careful. And what the mindfulness of meditation, mindfulness of breathing says, is that we don't actually have to do those meditations. We can just watch the breath. Yeah, that is sufficient in its own right, and that is kind of a relief. So we can avoid the what is sometimes called the dukkha patipada and go straight to the sukha patipada. Yeah, the painful practice and then the happy practice, as it is explained in the Anguttara 4s. So that is kind of the good news about this, and this good news, it carries on throughout the Anapanasati Sutta. The difficult things we can often skip, and then we can just go straight to the happy feelings all the way, according to this particular sutta, which is a very, to my mind, often underappreciated message of Anapanasati. You can avoid a lot of the negative things and go straight to all the positive and happy feelings, which is kind of wonderful. It's kind of really one of the things that makes the Buddha's message such a beautiful message compared to many other perhaps spiritual paths or practices. Still, sometimes it can be useful to use contemplations like the 31 parts of the body. Sometimes it can be useful, depending on your inclinations, the kind of defilements you have, and all of these kind of things. So sometimes it can be useful in moderation. How do you do the 31 parts of the body contemplation? You can do it any which way you want. It is an exercise in imagination. It's quite clear that it is about imagination, the way it is phrased in the suttas. So you just imagine the parts of your body. One way of doing it is simply to take all the skin off your body and see what you look like without skin. There's this old saying that beauty is only skin deep. Yeah, take the skin off, you understand the meaning of that straight away. Yeah. So it has a few kind of double meanings in that, but it's kind of very obvious that it means that straight away. So if you take the skin off your body, I don't know if you can imagine what the body without skin looks like. It's very different from a body with skin. And you can see this, that people do these things. They have exhibitions with bodies without skins. You can actually see quite clearly what it looks like, and it's a very different feeling. And it's actually a very powerful way of overcoming desire for the body. Yeah? Very difficult to have desire for that kind of body. It really leaves the mind very cool. So it can be very useful for cooling down the mind if you want to use it, but otherwise just use the mindfulness of breathing is sufficient to fulfill the kaya nupassana. So once we have practiced the kaya nupassana in this way, then we can move on to the Vedana Nupassana, which is the next 4 steps of the Anapanasati Sutta. So as always, I will read through it first of all, and then we will comment on this in a bit of detail afterwards. So this is how the Buddha describes this. They practice like this. I will breathe in experiencing rapture. They practice like this. I will breathe out experiencing rapture. Rapture is piti. They practice like this. I will breathe in experiencing bliss. They practice like this. I will breathe out experiencing bliss. They practice like this. I will breathe in experiencing mental processes. They practice like this. I will breathe out experiencing mental processes. They practice like this. I will breathe in stilling mental processes. They breathe like this. I will breathe out stilling the mental processes. So here you can see we are starting to get into some very interesting parts of meditation. We're talking about rapture. We're talking about bliss. Then it talks about mental processes, and mental processes usually in the suttas. The Pali word is citta sankhara, and citta sankhara usually refers to basically like the mental content that is defined as Vedana and Sanya. And of course, the mental content at this point is that bliss, it is that rapture, that is mainly the mental content. There's a little bit more, there's a little bit of perception of the breath perhaps, there's a little bit of body, maybe still a little bit in the background somewhere. So it's a little bit more than just bliss, but bliss is the main quality of the mind at this point. So you have the mental process, which is just more bliss, and then you have the calming down, the last one, citta sankharang patti sambati, pasambati, the calming down of the mental experience. Why? Because even though it is very blissful and very happy, there is still some movement in the mind. Things like piti, things like the will is still there in the background a little bit. So you need to calm down the process even more. So what you can start to see now, some of the themes of meditation start to emerge. One of the themes of meditation is the idea of happiness and joy, of positive feelings, piti, sukha. Even before you get to piti sukha, there may be some pamoja in the mind. Pamoja is kind of a basic piti, a gladness of the mind. But also, even just the factors before that, when the mindfulness is expanding and you're feeling the whole body, sabbakaya patisangvedi, that too is a kind of pleasant feeling already. So pleasure, happiness is one of the experiences. The other experience that you will see, which is already emerging, first you have the calming down of the kaya sankhara, the bodily processes. Now you have the calming down of the citta sankhara, the mental processes. So it is another theme here is the gradual calming down, the gradual stilling of the mind, becoming more and more still. And if there's anything that you should look for as signs that your meditation is going well, it is these two things: increasing levels of happiness, more and more joy, more and more bliss, sometimes very refined states of bliss and joy. That is one of them. And the other one is the calming down. These are the two almost hallmarks of good meditation. And you know that you're heading in the right direction. More and more peaceful, more and more powerful kind of bliss. Bliss becoming so powerful, it's like outlandish. It is kind of really, it's and this is what makes this so interesting. It's like you are on this journey towards something extraordinary. And one of my favorite symbols of the Buddha that you find in the Nagara Sutta. The Nagara Sutta is found in the Nidana Samyutta number 65. And the Nagara Sutta has the simile of the person in the jungle. The jungle is usually the world. We are trapped in the jungle. When you are in the jungle, you can't see very far. You are blocked because of all the trees, because of all the greenery around you. But then one day in that jungle, this person finds the path. A path in the jungle. You follow along this path. And this path, of course, is the Eightfold Path. And when you follow along this path, just like the ancient people did in the past, you come to this city, this beautiful, magnificent city in the jungle that has been lost for maybe centuries or millennia beforehand. And when you come to the city, this beautiful place, this is a simile for Nibbana. You come to Nibbana and you kind of build it up again. Make the city prosperous and powerful as it was in the past by having also other people seeing the same city. You build up the Sangha, the Bhikkhu Sangha, the Bhikkhuni Sangha. You build up the Upasakas and the Upasikas. Building up the fourfold assembly, the city becomes prosperous. But the idea here is this idea of being on this amazing spiritual journey, this adventure, the greatest adventure that any human being can have. We often talk about people being adventurous, that travel around the world, they climb mountains, they go into the deep recesses of the sea, the Mariana Trench or whatever it is called, all of these places. They go to the South Pole or the North Pole, they travel to Mars. But they are still trapped in the prison of the five senses. They haven't really gone very far at all. From a Buddhist point of view, they are still in the same world, the same trap, the same prison, the same slavery as you have always been within. And now, one day, you go on this adventure that is far more exciting, far more full with bliss, far more full of peace, far more full of meaning. We are looking here at the very meaning of life itself, and this is what is so extraordinary about this. The Buddhist path is a path to discovery of the meaning of life. When you come to the ancient city in the jungle, when you are on this adventure journey, you don't, not just on an adventure, you discover the very meaning of life itself. And that is what is so extraordinary about this. So all of these things, when you start to experience the piti, the sukha, the passaddhi on this path, you are experiencing greater and greater degrees of meaning, greater and greater degrees of entering into this amazing adventure that every human being can access. Every human being has the potential, but unfortunately some human beings just don't have the necessary qualities to enable them to even enter this path, even to get started. So consider yourself really lucky. You are at the gates. Maybe you are already inside the adventure park. Moving on. Enjoying the various kind of adventures in the adventure park. The Buddha's adventure park. Not sure if the Buddha would agree with that, but anyway, I'm just saying it anyway. Just maybe he would tell me off if I use this kind of language, so I should be careful. But it's something like that, And I think the simile is really pointing in that direction. So these are some of the signposts that we're heading in the right direction. The happiness, the tranquility, and of course, as you do this all the way along, your mindfulness is becoming more and more powerful because with the happiness comes more and more powerful mindfulness. Why? Because you don't want to be anywhere else. You don't want your mind to blur into the past and the future. You really want to be present. The energy is coming. The energy is not a sign that you're going in the right direction. But it's not a kind of a frenetic energy. It is not a restless energy. It is a still, beautiful kind of energy. The energy of the mind. Your vipassana is increasing. You're seeing things more clearly. You can feel that the mind has clarity to it. You know that with these kind of qualities, you will be able to understand the panchakanda. You will be able to understand the nature of your mind because it is free of confusion, free of the usual defilements that blind us to the nature of reality. And all of these things are happening as you're doing this. And this is why it is such a marvelous and wonderful thing. And once you get to these experiences, as soon as you get them, some people, what happens is that once you've had one of these experiences, and many of you have had some of these experiences in the past, obviously because we're practicing this path, and I know many of you fairly well, I know that you have been there in the past, and then you want to get back there, and that is where you make your first mistake. If you want to get back there, it assumes that you know where it is that you want to go. It assumes that there is a place to go back to. But actually, one of the things about this practice is that it is never exactly the same. You may experience more piti and sukha in the future, but it will be slightly different from last time. The perceptions will be slightly different, the path in there will be slightly different, the feelings will not be exactly the same. Piti comes in a large varieties of experiences. So if you want the same thing, you will never get it because the same thing doesn't exist. You will experience something else instead next time around. And this is a very powerful way of stopping you for craving for the same experience. Because once you understand the same experience doesn't exist, you will stop craving for it. Instead, you put in the cause and conditions, and as you put in the cause and conditions, you get something else, something equally interesting, or maybe a little less interesting, or maybe more interesting. You don't know, but you just allow the process to unfold. You enjoy whatever you have on the path, and then you will eventually make progress in this way. So the first one of these four is piti patisangvedi, experiencing rapture. Get the English this is the terminology used by Bhante Sujato, rapture. Some people say joy. Depends on how you want to translate these terms. There isn't any absolute correct translation. I think the idea with rapture is that it is often kind of felt physically. It can be like this movement inside, the movement of bliss in the body and in the mind. And that's why rapture may actually be a good translation. And so the first one here is the rapture, and it can often be felt like an electricity in the body or pleasures in the body. It can be felt as waves. It often has a sense of motion to it. It is both mental and physical kind of at the same time, and it can be experienced in many different ways. But basically, it is just a pleasurable feeling and often also connected to the body. So very often when we practice this path, when you start to feel just good about yourself, you have an experience of pamoja. Pamoja is like a general gladness. You feel, yay, I'm here in this beautiful place with really good kalyana mittas. I'm practicing this amazing path of the Buddha on this adventure of a lifetime. And you're kind of walking around happily. You feel kind of bright and light and happy. That is kind of pamoja. Maybe one way of thinking about pamoja. Then you sit down in your meditation, and that pamoja gets intensified, and then eventually you start to feel this powerful sense of bliss in the body and in the mind. Kind of waves maybe, or whatever. It's described in the Visuddhimagga, the various ways you can experience the piti. And that is how piti is a strengthening of the initial pamoja. That's how it comes about. So one of the interesting questions here is, sometimes when you go from the kaya anupassana, you're watching the breath, you're starting to become very peaceful. Some people stop at that point, and they're not really able to go from peaceful breath to joyful breath. They find that transition. Many people are blocked at that transition. So how can we make that transition happen, going from kaya anupassana to vedana anupassana? And very often what we need to do at that particular juncture, we need to very gently bring into mind an object which enables you to actually experience the joy. And very often you don't have to do very much. You don't want to think a lot, because thinking a lot will disturb the meditation. But it's almost like just bringing up a memory from the past. A memory of, I am a person who lives well. Sila nusati. I live well. And just that memory that you live well will be enough when you are peaceful to bring about some joy. And then suddenly the piti may arise. Depending on your character, you can actually use different ways of bringing about the piti. It can be the Buddha nusati. The Buddha nusati, just reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha. The fact that you have the Buddha as your teacher. The Buddha is the greatest spiritual genius in human history, in recorded human history anyway. There's no one like the Buddha. The Buddha is really unique in the world. And you have the Buddha as your teacher. Isn't that extraordinary? How did you find the Buddha? How did you navigate through the jungle of the world and discover the Buddha? It's amazing. Most people never find the Buddha. Most people settle for some lesser spiritual path. I apologize to all the people I offend when I say this, but that's my point of view. The path of the Buddha is just superior to everything else. How did we discover this? Wow, I'm so lucky. I'm part of this wonderful community. I have the most amazing, wonderful teacher in the world. I have access to these extraordinary, powerful teachings. And again, very gently, by nudging your mind towards that, just that feeling of having the Buddha as your teacher, the Dhamma as your teaching, all of these Kalyana Mittas, the gratitude for being here, the metta and the karuna that you have for the people around you, leaning your mind in that direction, combined with the peace of the breath, can then give rise to this rapture, can give rise to the piti in the mind. So it's a very gentle kind of nudging of the mind that you do. And then it can happen. Sometimes the transition is just automatic, because sometimes we just know that we are good people, and so the rapture is always there under the surface, and so when you become peaceful, it just arises automatically. That is the best way for it to happen, if it arises automatically, because then it's very easy. It just comes by itself. And indeed, if we develop the sila really well, we know deep within that we are good people, because our mind is also wholesome, then it tends to happen automatically, because you don't really need to reflect specifically. It's like the sila nusati is automatic. It just happens as part of the process. So then you just carry on. Piti patisangvedi. Next one, sukha patisangvedi. What is the difference between piti and sukha? Usually sukha is more refined. Sukha is said to be usually more mental, piti more related, more physical. And there is more passaddhi. When it comes to sukha, the mind is more tranquil. It's a more profound kind of happiness. A happiness where you start to feel incredibly solid. You're just sitting there, like a rock, just feeling this beautiful, powerful, peaceful happiness. And again, this happens automatically. Don't try to make it happen. Allow the process to happen by itself. And the less you do, the less involved you are in the process, the more likely it is to happen. You stand back. You are a passenger on this beautiful journey. There's nothing that you need to do. You kind of feel this wonderful thing happening to you as if you are not really involved in it. It's just happening to you rather than you doing it. And this is anyway a very beautiful way of thinking about the process, because if you think of the process as happening to you, it is already a kind of non-self process. You're starting also to feel the idea of non-self. You don't create the bliss in the mind. You allow the bliss to happen. When you get out of the way, this is one of Ajahn Brahm's kind of sayings, when you get out of the way, then the path happens. And then moving from there, the next one then is the Chitta Sankharang Patisangvedi. And Chitta Sankharang Patisangvedi, again, is just more of the same. It's the kind of the full experience of what is happening at this particular point. You are just experiencing the various perceptions and feelings, mostly just bliss, maybe a few other things. And then as the process deepens more, you calm down the Chitta Sankhara. It becomes even more peaceful. More and more peaceful, allowing the peace to come. The more you withdraw, the less you do to make this process happen, the more peaceful it comes all by itself. It's a beautiful journey, so easy, so natural, And the more you do this, the more natural you feel. The more you feel, this is what I wanted to be all the time. This is the real me. That's what it feels like. This is my real home. This is reality. Everything I felt before feels so superficial. It feels so fleeting. It feels so impermanent. It feels so unreliable. This is starting to feel really solid. And so you can see how easy and how tempting it is to take this experience as a kind of self, Because you actually start to feel like this is more like you than everything you had before. This is starting to feel like the real reality. And the deeper your meditation goes, the more real everything starts to feel. And the five-sense world starts to feel unreal. This is not reality at all. This is like just a blur of impermanence, a blur of attachments, a blur of things always moving around. The real reality is the thing that you discover through meditation practice. So this is the Vedananupassana. And if you can get this far, already you are having a gold mine of beautiful experiences that will last you for a lifetime. Even just having this understanding gives you a different perspective on the world. You understand the world is so much more than the ordinary experience of the world that we have through the five senses. You're starting to understand the real gold in the existence of human beings. This is what is happening here. Now, one of the interesting things here, one of the things that kind of stands out is when you compare again this expression of Vedananupassana and you compare that to the Vedananupassana that you find in the Satipatthana Sutta. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Vedananupassana is, first of all, the three kinds of feeling, Sukha, Dukkha, and Adukkhamasukha. Happy feeling, painful feeling, and neither happy nor painful feeling. And then the Vedananupassana has the Samisa Vedana and the Niramisa Vedana. Again, Sukha, Dukkha, Adukkhamasukha for each one. So these are the kind of the five things that Vedananupassana is about. Dukkha, Sukha, Adukkhamasukha, Niramisa, and Samisa. Now, what is interesting is that if you compare that to the Anapanasati, no dukkha. There's nothing there about dukkha, right? Nor is there really anything about samisa. These are really more like niramisa feelings. A little bit of samisa because the five senses are still there to a very small extent. But mostly niramisa sukha is what we are experiencing at this point. The full niramisa sukha is the jhana, but this is like the preliminary niramisa sukha that you experience. So how can it be that if we don't experience the painful feelings, if the painful feelings are kind of left by the wayside, how can it be that it says that we are still fulfilling the Vedananupassana? How can we fulfill the Vedananupassana without contemplating the painful feelings? How is this possible? Well, first of all, it's very interesting because it means that actually it is enough to contemplate happy feelings. If all we do is contemplate happy feelings, actually that's enough. We don't have to contemplate the painful feelings at all, which is already a very beautiful result, seeing it from that point of view. But the point is that the way to understand something, the most powerful way of understanding anything, is by its absence. And because the painful feelings are absent, we can actually understand them much better than contemplating them when they are present. Contemplating a painful feeling when it's present, it's very hard to understand because you are still in the water, you're still in the middle of the painful feeling, you haven't emerged from it yet. It's only when you come out of the water, when the tadpole becomes a frog, that is when you can understand things. So coming out of the painful feeling, that is actually when you can understand it properly. So all we have to do is to experience happy feelings. No need to sit with painful feelings. I think it's really counterproductive. I never understand the meditation techniques where they tell you, just sit with it, contemplate the painful feelings. I never met anyone who became very wise by contemplating painful feelings. All I saw was people in pain. All I saw was people disrobing. All I saw was people giving up on meditation because it was too much pain. That is all I really saw. I never saw much wisdom through that. What I saw was the people practicing good samatha in the right way. They are the ones that I saw who found real wisdom on this path. So to me, this is one of those, again, beautiful things, You don't have to go through the pain. Bypass the pain. Don't think that pain is necessary on this path. It is happiness in Buddhism that leads to more happiness. First of all, the happiness of being virtuous. That happiness of being virtuous leads to the happiness of meditation. The happiness of meditation then leads to the happiness of insight. One happiness building upon the previous happiness, one coming after the previous one. It's a very inspiring and interesting path. So that is the Vedana Nupassana, and some of you asked about that yesterday, so I hope I have answered your questions. If not, please feel free to write down the question and we will see if we can answer it this evening instead, or as well, or whatever. So then going through this experience of Vedana Nupassana, deepening the feelings, deeper and deeper states of happiness, then eventually comes the Chitta Nupassana. I should maybe say one thing which I think is interesting about this whole process as well. And one thing that some of you may have heard, maybe especially if you are monastics, is the commentarial understanding of the Anapanasati Sutta is a bit different from what I have been saying. The commentarial interpretation is found in the Visuddhimagga, and the Visuddhimagga says that Piti Patisangvedi here refers to the first two jhanas. Sukha Patisangvedi refers to the first three jhanas. And the Chitta Sankara Patisangvedi also is about the same things. And to my mind, it is not wrong. Of course, there is piti in the jhana, so it's not a wrong interpretation from the Visuddhimagga, but it is a very, very narrow interpretation that misses, to my mind, much of the point of what this is about. If you look at the way meditation is explained in the suttas, in the Satta Sambhojjhanga, in the process of liberation that you find in the suttas in many places, it is always a sequence of piti, passaddhi, sukha, then samadhi. Piti, passaddhi, sukha, then samadhi in that process. And all of that is missing if you interpret this piti and sukha here as the jhana states. So I think that interpretation in the Visuddhimagga, I haven't read the Visuddhimagga in detail, maybe it is there, but it wasn't there. It wasn't in the part on the Anapanasati Sutta that I looked at. It is missing a very important part of the path. And one of the interesting things about the suttas, and one of the things that the Buddha also says about the suttas, is that they are graduated. It is always about a gradual process. One of the masterful things about the Buddha is that everything has a sequence to it. Everything has a certain order. The gradual training begins in the beginning and then gradually moving all the way to arahantship. And almost all the suttas have a structure like that. And so I think it is very likely that the Anapanasati Sutta also must have that kind of structure. Yeah? It is a gradual movement towards liberation. And when we now come to the Citta Nupassana, the factor number 12 of the Citta Nupassana is Vimochayang Cittang. Vimochayang Cittang, liberating the mind. Well, that usually means the jhanas. Yeah? The vimokas are the jhanas. The Sammaya Vimutti are the jhana states. Asammaya Vimutti are the Aryan states. And so we are moving towards the jhanas, and that's why I prefer to see this as a gradual movement towards that. And I think that is missing from the explanation of the Visuddhimagga. And to me, this is a more powerful way of thinking about this path. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because sometimes the commentaries are usually very useful. It is important not to be too kind of dismissive of the commentaries, because if we are dismissive, then we think that we know better than some of these ancient people, and sometimes, very often, these ancient people had a lot of wisdom, and the idea that we always know better, that's often just conceit and it's misunderstanding. But sometimes, because it is commentaries, because it is not the word of the Buddha, we are allowed to disagree if there is good grounds for disagreeing. And that, I think, is the best way to think about the commentaries. Anyway, let's come to the Citta Nupassana as it is explained in the Anapanasati Sutta. All the way along here, by the way, the breath is always with us. It is always in the background. It is always the anchor, if you like, for the meditation. But already here, the feelings are becoming very powerful, and the feelings are really kind of in the foreground, and the breath is often in the background as an anchor for what we're doing here. So, Citta Nupassana. They practice like this. I will breathe in, experiencing the mind. They practice like this. I will breathe out, experiencing the mind. They practice like this. I will breathe in, gladdening the mind. They practice like this. I will breathe out, gladdening the mind. They practice like this. I will breathe in, stilling the mind. They practice like this. I will breathe out, stilling the mind. They practice like this, I will breathe in, freeing the mind. They practice like this, I will breathe out, freeing the mind. So, again, you can see here the same theme is continuing. We have the gladdening of the mind, and we have the stilling of the mind. Here it says immersing the mind in the samadhi, but I prefer the stilling of the mind. Immersing the mind in samadhi is Bhante Sujato's translation. I prefer stilling. To me, that speaks more to me than immersion that he uses. Immersion is interesting, but it doesn't have the same emotional impact to my mind. So again, the same qualities, the same themes, more happiness, more joy, more stilling, and also the freeing of the mind. This is one thing I didn't mention before, but of course, as you go through this process, there is a gradual freeing of the mind. You feel more and more free as you go through this. Why? Because the hindrances are disappearing, and the hindrances are like a jail. The senses are disappearing. The senses are like a jail. And all of these things are the internal freeing of the mind, gradually happening. Energy, again, becoming more and more powerful, more and more mindfulness, more and more clarity, more and more vipassana, all of these things coming together as you move through this. So what does it mean to experience the mind? And this is important, I think, again, to contemplate. One thing it can mean the jhana states, because of course the jhanas are an experience of the mind. But I think it begins before that. And I would say that the experience of the mind begins when those things that are not the mind, they start fading away. What is not the mind? The other five senses. So when the other five senses are really fading into the background, really becoming very weak, and you can't really experience them very much anymore, what happens? At a certain point, you will start to see a light. The sun will suddenly come up in your mind, or maybe if it's not the sun, maybe the moon. Some kind of what is often called the nimitta in common, in the ordinary, how we normally talk about this. In the suttas called the obasa sometimes. We will see this in the Upakilesa Sutta later on. And in the suttas, it's never called the samadhi nimitta. In the suttas actually means something else. It means the object of contemplation. It doesn't mean the light in the mind. So I would say that once you start to have a light in the mind, and the five senses have almost completely disappeared, at this point you are coming into the realm of the citta nupassana. And so there is still some degree of agency here, still some degree of the mind developing. Once you go into the jhanas, you get into these frozen states where you can't really do anything. The mind doesn't really develop inside the jhana. Inside the jhana, the mind is like solid. But because here the mind is still developing, I would say you are still outside of the jhana state. So you are experiencing the mind. Now, again, how do we make that jump from the very beautiful feelings of piti and sukha? How do we make that change from there onto experiencing the mind? What is it that enables that? Some people will say they experience a lot of happiness in the meditation, but they have never really experienced that light in the mind. So how can we make that transition? It's one of those very important points. And again, what you have to do is you have to ask yourself, well, what is it that blocks you from moving in to the experience of the mind? Well, what blocks you will be that you are holding on to the five senses to some extent. You are holding on maybe to the body. So at this point, really what you have to do is you have to give up the five sense world a little bit more firmly. Vosaggarammanam karitva. That is the famous expression from the samadhi indriya. The samadhi indriya is defined as vosaggarammanam karitva samadhing labhati chittassa ekaggata labhati. You gain samadhi, you gain one-pointedness of mind from having made vosagga the foundation. Arammana means foundation in the suttas. It does not mean object. Object is a later usage of arammana. Arammana means the foundation. You make a foundation through vosagga, and vosagga is letting go. And the main thing we let go of is the five sense world. So at this point, just simply give up the five sense world. Give up the idea that this world is interesting. Remind yourself very briefly how problematic this world is, how you are willing to give up all seeing, all hearing, all tasting, all of that, all body. Don't want to have anything more to do with it. And as you give that up, as you vosagga those five hindrances, remind yourself of that danger. The mind lets go, hopefully, a little bit more, and that can allow you to make the transition. So stay with the bliss. Give up the world a little bit more. You can do that sometimes at the beginning of the meditation, before you get started, because it's hard to really do these things as you go very deep. So often it's very simple perceptions that you should use, like a nudging of the mind, not thinking very much. And then give it up. Or you can establish these perceptions at the very beginning, and if you establish them at the beginning, at this point you will just remind yourself of that perception, and then let go, and then the light may arise. And then if the light arises in the mind, then you stay with that light. First of all, the light has to be fairly stable. It has to be fairly a sense that you are able to stay with it. And if it is reasonably stable and reasonably powerful, it is quite easy to stay with because it is very attractive. Unless you get frightened. We'll come back to these kind of things later on when we come to the Upakilesa Sutta. So we assume that you make that transition. And now you have like a light in the mind, chittang patisangvedi, Then you carry on the process, you stay with the light in the mind, you stay with this beautiful nimitta that you have, and you abhipamojayang chittang. Abhipamojayang chittang is the gladdening of the mind that you see here. You allow it to happen. You stay with it, and the gladdening process, again, is an automatic thing when you observe this in the right way. Yeah, this is where life gets really interesting, and you are kind of starting to enter a different reality, a reality that you had no idea even existed, and now you are moving on to something that really makes life worthwhile in an entirely different way from what you had ever thought was possible. Then you have samadhahang chittang, stilling the mind, gladdening the mind, stilling the mind, allowing the bliss to become more and more powerful, more and more profound, while everything is tranquilized. And then at the very end, the very last thing that happens is vimochayang chittang, liberating the mind. This is the very last thing that happens before you enter the jhanas. And that liberation of the mind is the final letting go of the five senses, including the will. The will and the five senses have to be let go of at the door to jhana. You cannot bring them into the jhana experiences. And that's why this is called vimochayang chittang. You are liberating the mind from these oppressions of the mind. You're getting out of prison for the very first time. Wow, now I know what prison is like. You thought that the prisons, like, I don't know, you have prisons in Sri Lanka, I presume. You thought that was prison. Now you understand the real prison, These ordinary prisons, they were just kind of, they weren't really real prisons. These are the real prisons, the prisons of the mind. And this is where the problem finally is overcome in a very, very profound way. So this is the idea of the vimochayang chittang, liberating the mind. So again, it is interesting to compare this to the Satipatthana Sutta. In the Satipatthana Sutta, you have the Chitta Nupassana, and in the Chitta Nupassana, you have the various contemplations of the Saraga Chitta, the Sadosa Chitta, Samoha Chitta, the Vitaraga Chitta, Vitadosa Chitta, Vitamoha Chitta. And of course, there are all of these defilements. And you have the Sankitta Chitta, the Vikitta Chitta, you find in the Chitta Nupassana. You have the Mahagata Chitta, the Anuttara Chitta, the Vimutta Chitta, and what is that? What have I forgotten? I've forgotten one. Anyway, you get the idea. So again, what you find in the Satipatthana Sutta, you find a large number of states of mind. Some of them are the negative states of mind, like the Moha Chitta and the Raga Chitta and the Dosa Chitta. These are the defiled states of mind. So again, you don't really find that in the Satipatthana Sutta. Some of these qualities are still present, but maybe in very, very refined form. They're so refined, you don't even know that they are there. Of course, there's a little bit of moha, because moha goes all the way to awakening, but it's only a tiny little bit of moha left in the mind. Basically, there are no defilements there. And again, you don't need to observe these defilements in action to understand what they are. In fact, it is impossible to understand a defilement when it is present, because when it is present, the very nature of defilement distorts the mind. It means that you already have a vested interest. You already have something that you are attached to, something that you are averse to. And as long as you have attachment, desire, and aversion, there is no way that you can understand that defilement. So it is only when you come out of these defilements, when the mind is becoming very pure, as we see here in the Anapanasati Sutta, that is where you understand these defilements. So there is no need to try to contemplate too much the defilements of the mind. All you really need to know is that it is a defilement, it is a problem. That is one of the most important contemplations, to know the problem, because the problem is very broad. There are very refined defilements of the mind, so even understanding it fully is actually quite difficult. That is really the hard part. And then it's just about overcoming them. That is really what we should focus on. Don't need to contemplate it too much. You don't get much insight because the mind is already distorted at that point. So this again is the beautiful part of the Anapanasati Sutta. It focuses on the positive. It leaves all the negative qualities by the wayside. You don't really go through them. You contemplate them through their absence, not through their presence. The most powerful kind of anicca is always the anicca of nirodha, of cessation. And we will come back to that later on as we go through this. So this is the journey into the mind, the journey through the first three aspects of the Satipatthana Sutta, and it is an extraordinarily interesting journey. This is the kind of thing that people should pay money to be able to get this kind of instructions. How come people aren't paying thousands of dollars to get into this retreat? Why aren't people from around the world lining up in massive lines outside, asking to come in? Please, please, I want to come into this retreat. I want to learn how to practice this path. Why isn't that the case? The reason is because there's so much delusion in the world. People don't really understand where happiness is to be found. People will pay lots of money to get into a concert by some kind of rock star, thinking that that is happiness. But they will not pay thousands of dollars to become a monk or a nun. If you really understood what was at stake, you would go to the best meditation master in the world and say, please, I will give you my whole life, I will give you everything I have. Please just make me a monk so I can stay in this monastery. That is when you really understand what is at stake. But we don't get that. And because we don't get that, that is why we don't practice these things. When you listen to someone like Ajahn Brahm teach the Dhamma, it is just so inspiring. One of the things I love about Ajahn Brahm, I have been living with Ajahn Brahm for 30 years. And sometimes they say that familiarity breeds contempt. After a while you think, you just dismiss them because you heard the same thing all the time. But what is beautiful, if you have a very powerful teacher, you don't really get that contempt. What you get is, if you think about it in a positive way, you get more and more appreciation with time. And what I love about Ajahn Brahm is not so much his jokes. His jokes are okay. I like his jokes as well, but that's not the main thing about Ajahn Brahm. People think that Ajahn Brahm is all about jokes. No, Ajahn Brahm is not all about jokes. People think that Ajahn Brahm is all about stories. No, Ajahn Brahm is not all about stories. Ajahn Brahm is about settling happiness. Ajahn Brahm is like being in the presence of someone who makes you feel peaceful. When I'm sitting there and Ajahn Brahm is giving a Dhamma talk, some days when he is really in the mood, you feel really, really peaceful just by being in the presence. It's like you're being in the presence of this generator of peace, this powerful machine of peace. That is what Ajahn Brahm is like. And you just sit there, you close your eyes, and you can feel by osmosis how the peace and all of these positive qualities, they kind of penetrate into you. This is one of the powerful things about being in the presence of a great meditation teacher. And this is why I have always stayed with Ajahn Brahm. I've never really seen any point in going anywhere else, because as long as you're making progress, as long as you have confidence in your teacher, as long as your teacher teaches in accordance with the word of the Buddha, there is no issue. Why go anywhere else? Okay, so you visit Sri Lanka every now and again, which is a wonderful thing to do. But that is what is so powerful about Ajahn Brahm. He reminds you of this path. He reminds you of this practice. When you're with him, he reminds you of non-self. He reminds you of happiness. He reminds you of the qualities of the Dhamma. This is what any great teacher should do. You can feel that you are in the presence of the Dhamma in a very powerful way. It says in the suttas, it says that even to be in the presence of an arahant. I'm not claiming anything for Ajahn Brahm, I'm just talking about the suttas now. But the suttas say that even if you are in the presence of an arahant, it is one of the most powerful things in life to have been with someone who has that kind of mind. Just seeing a person like that, hearing a person like that, feeling the power of a person like that changes your life in a very powerful way. It changes your life because you can see the Dhamma in action. One thing is the Dhamma in theory, but seeing the Dhamma through the practice, through the expression, expressing the path, through someone's behavior is a very, very powerful thing. And we should never underestimate that. So please, if you choose a teacher in this world, choose someone who is truly inspiring. Sometimes when I hear people, they say they want to become a monastic, sometimes I feel people are asking the wrong kind of questions. They're asking, where are they practicing the Vinaya really hard, only eating one meal a day, practicing all the kind of ascetic practices. But this is coming from the intellect. It is an idea that you have about the path. Yes, you should go to the monastery where they're practicing the Vinaya, but they don't have to practice all the rules of the commentaries, all the rules of the sub-commentaries, all the local rules. You practice the Vinaya good enough. You follow the Patimokkha rules, but you don't go overboard. You don't start out with all the ascetic practices straight away, because usually you don't know what you're doing when you're starting out. And I instead recommend people, if you want to ordain, you want to become a monastic, you want to find a good teacher, go to a place where you feel good, where you feel at ease, where you feel that there is a sense of metta in the air, where there is a sense of karuna coming from the teacher, where you can relax, where you can be at ease, because that is where your meditation is going to work. If you feel tense, if you can't relax properly, if there is a lot of fault-finding going on, you're never going to be able to have success in your meditation. So go to that place. That is what really matters. Yes, they should practice the Vinaya, but how you feel about the place is probably the most important thing. And then, when you build up enough qualities inside of yourself, then you can start to look for more solitude, the sunyagara, and you kind of go maybe somewhere far away. Some good forest monasteries have enough seclusion already, but there comes a point when also you may want to look for even more seclusion in your practice. But know the right thing. Look for the things that really matter in your life. Understand how this path works. Don't be too idealistic. Don't base your monastic life on ideas about what is right. Use more feelings. Don't be afraid of feelings. What feels right is often the right thing. Not always. Sometimes the feelings can lead you astray, right? Sometimes, sensual pleasures feel right. That is obviously wrong. But feelings are also important. Find that beautiful balance between the intellect and the feelings, and then you're going to be on the right track. So it is exactly 5 o'clock. So please, everyone, carry on enjoying yourself. We'll have a nice little break, and we'll come back to the Q&A session in 1 hour at 6 o'clock. Yeah, I got that right, I think. So that is all for now.